I was maybe 16 years old, and I was kind of a rebellious kid. I joined Tinder to meet some older guys, and I was matched with this really attractive 20-year-old that seemed really into me. Naive, I know. Anyway, he asked to pick me up from school the following day to get ice cream and walk around a nearby lake. I said yes. He picked me up and we had a great conversation, nothing weird, and it seemed like we really enjoyed each other's company. When we got to the lake, no one was there because it was the middle of October and very cold on the water. We walked about halfway around the lake, and that's when it got weird. He started talking to me about crime documentaries and how he studied them and knew how to kill someone without getting caught. He started making tracks in the mud and said that he would wear shoes that were too big so the police couldn't match him on the shoe size. He picked up his shoes to show me 10.5 and informed me that he wore an 8. I got uneasy. He started strolling around me while I was sitting on a bench like I was prey. He went to one of those doggy baggy dispensers. He grabbed one of the bags and started swatting me in my face. I thought he might be trying to gross me out, so I half giggled and swatted it away. On one of my swats, he grabbed me by the forearm and pulled me in and put the bag over my head. Still, I thought he might be kidding, but as I tried to get away, I noticed he wasn't letting up. I was starting to panic now, realizing I wasn't getting any air, and he picked me up in sort of a headlock position. I was kicking and trying to elbow, and I guess one of the elbows connected to his groin, and we both fell to the ground. He laughed and said, "You got more fight in you than I thought you did. Was just trying to make you pass out, but I didn't even get that far. I'm proud of you." All of my stuff, phone, taser, was in his car on the other side of the lake, so I decided to play along and pretend that it was funny. I told him I needed my inhaler now and to walk me back. He did, surprisingly. I got to his car and I grabbed my taser and my phone while he walked around the back of his car to the driver's side. I texted my mom SOS and to track my location. When I looked up from my phone, I noticed the guy had pulled out his pocket knife. He slowly laid it into the tip of my chest, just enough for it to pierce my skin. He just blankly stared at me, and this went on for about 30 full seconds. I don't know why, but I said, "You're not gonna do it." This seemed to snap him out of it, and he paused, and then let out a hysterical laugh. Between laughs, he got out, "That's the second time I've tried to kill you today." The whole drive home, he proceeded to tell me how he would have raped and mutilated my body if I accidentally died that day. I got home and bolted out of the car. As soon as I did, he sped off. I got a dick pic later that night, and then he blocked me. I looked him up, and it turns out he was actually 27 years old and had a criminal record for domestic violence. That's all I could get on him though. I reported it to the police, but nothing really came of it though. Probably because I wasn't willing to tell my parents what happened. Either way, worst encounter of my life. I live in a regional town of Australia. There is no sex trafficking problem here. It just doesn't exist. There's no gang activity, no unsolved murders, and no missing people or unsolved crimes. Just to give you the laydown of the sort of area I live in. Also, I'm a trans man. I'm pre-T, so I don't often pass as a male, despite me trying to. And that is probably somewhat obvious by my profile picture on Facebook, where I look pretty feminine. Now onto the story. This happened today and I'm still unsure whether I should do anything about it, or if the police would even bother. I flip furniture as a hobby. I like to pick up free or cheap worn out furniture, repair it, repaint it, and then sell it. It keeps my mind occupied. Facebook Marketplace is usually the place where I go to find stuff. So this morning I found a post for a free table. I messaged the person if I could pick it up today. As I'm messaging them, their Facebook profile picture disappeared. I thought that was weird, but maybe they just had changed it. They agreed to the time and sent me the address. No worries, it's on the edge of town. They sent me some random obscure message. "Are you coming alone, or will you have your husband with you?" Okay, I'm not married, and this is slapping me in the face with red flags. But I think maybe the table is heavy, and they think I might need help carrying it. I respond with, nah, it's all good, I'll be alright. There's no response back. I have an uneasy feeling that something isn't right with this. Never felt this way before, and don't know why I do now. But I figure that it's in the middle of the day. I've got my phone, and I'm driving there in a safe town. Maybe I'm just overthinking the whole thing. So I hop in my car and I head to the agreed place. I couldn't find the exact address on my GPS, which I thought was odd, but nevertheless, I find the street. There's nothing there. By that I mean, there's a creek that runs by the side of it, empty lots with brushland and tall overgrown grass, a disused isolated somewhat motel, and 3 warehouses. By this stage, I am feeling really off. Everything inside of me is saying, dude, there's something wrong with this whole situation. I'm paying a little more attention to that feeling at this stage, but keep going. 2 of the warehouses had no signage, but there were a couple of cars out in front, and I could tell they're used for a business of some sort. Their address isn't the one I was given though. Even though the motel looked like it hadn't been used in years, I see a mid-40s guy sitting on the steps of one of the units smoking. I think to myself, that is a bit bloody creepy, but maybe he owns the place, and he's doing some kind of work and just taking a break, or maybe he's just a squatter. So I drive down the street a little further to find the last warehouse. The address is where I was meant to pick it up, so it must be it. I start thinking maybe they just got the wrong number. I mean, this place has tall weeds surrounding it, rubbish out in the front, and surely hasn't been used since it was built. I might like free furniture, but I'm not an idiot. I decide I don't want it anymore and message the bloke that I'm sorry but I couldn't find the place. I got a message back saying, "Are you in the ute? I saw you drive up and down a couple times. Are you alone?" There's no cars or any sign of life at this warehouse, and by now my intuition is screaming at me to get out of there. Yes, I have a ute, but I don't see anyone around. How did they know? I messaged in reply, "Yeah mate, sorry can't find the place, cheers anyway." I get no response for about an hour, no sorry or anything, just, "It's the old motel. You have to get out of your car and walk to the back of reception." That same worn down isolated motel with overgrown weeds that hasn't been used in many years. The same one with a weird guy sitting on the step. I message back, "What are you talking about? The place that hasn't been used in years?" I get no response, nothing. So I head home and sit down for a drink and Google this place again. I had forgotten the exact address, so I go back on Messenger to find it. Except it's gone. So I go back to Facebook Marketplace and the whole ad is gone. It just disappeared as if it didn't happen. What do you all think? Did I just avoid something sinister happening? My gut says I did. Creepy free table guy who was likely planning to do something really bad to an unsuspecting freebie hunter. Let's not meet. For background, I'm a gay man, 32, and live in Southern Oregon. I have a rather large following on Instagram, nature photography, and a large following on Twitter. Having a large follower count, and even sometimes having a modest sized account, you encounter people who push the limits into ranges that are rather inappropriate. I've had my fair share of creeps to push the limit. Most of them don't faze me. It's easy to block people and ignore them as well, and usually after a short period they learn to piss off, except for one guy. I received a message one day from a guy in Colorado. He was 24 or 25 if I remember, and at first he seemed rather nice. He messaged me with the usual, "Hey, how are you doing?" Being a down-to-earth person, I always respond and ask the same. Though, with the amount of messages I receive, I can't continue the conversation with everyone, or I never leave my phone. Though, like I said, I try my best. Usually the messages are friendly, nature-oriented, and the occasional flirt, but after this guy got a reply from me about how I was doing, he jumped right in. "You're really hot. Where do you live? I want to know all about you." I responded in a friendly capacity, telling him thank you and telling him that I'm from the Pacific Northwest, keeping it vague. The conversation then changed even further. I'd like to meet you. When can I meet you? Can we be boyfriends? Then it happened like it always does. How big is your dick? Are you a top or a bottom? Do you like being dominated? Being more interested in personality first, sexuality later, I read his message but didn't respond. I wasn't really interested anyways. I looked over his profile and saw little things that he would post that made me feel like I wouldn't be comfortable talking to him, aside from his clearly strong come-ons. Being this is Twitter, and I didn't respond, I don't believe they send read receipts, and I figured he would just get the hint. A day went by, and then he messaged me a few times, with more live comments. My Twitter is NSFW, so I kind of expect it. I respond to him telling him thanks for the compliments, but didn't answer the questions about my location and such. Again, keeping everything short and vague. He again presses me about where I lived, and that's when I finally stopped responding altogether. After a few days, he messaged me, "Are you ignoring me?" I mean, it was kinda obvious. I wasn't responding and I was still posting on my social sites. I eventually responded that I didn't feel comfortable with the conversation approach and that I don't give out my location and such. He responded, clearly rather offended. "Okay, what the fuck ever." So, I blocked him. Later that night, the same day that I had blocked him, I got a message from another account, just random letters from a username with no post. The message went as follows. "Why the fuck did you block me, bitch? I just wanted to get with you. You're a little fucking bitch. Unblock me, or you'll regret that you ever did." I said fuck this noise, and blocked that profile too, without responding. He then, after a while, messaged me on Instagram, and using the email from my Instagram contact button, emails me as well. The messages were along the lines of, "I love you. Unblock me, or you'll regret this. I'm gonna fucking kill myself. Hell, I'll kill you." Again, I reported these messages to Instagram, reported the messages on Twitter, blocked him, took screenshots of the messages, and didn't respond to the email with the same vulgar content. He messaged me from more accounts telling me, "I have all your photos from Instagram and Twitter. I'm gonna use them to catfish people on Grindr. You'll regret ever blocking me." Then he sends me screenshots of several Grindr profiles he created with my photos. I talked to a friend of mine who is an attorney, and he wrote up a legal statement to send to him. "You can't legally use my photos to impersonate me. I will press charges, etc." And I said it to him on yet another profile he was harassing me on. The long legal sounding warning message that he needed to cease his actions immediately. He responded with, "Go ahead, have fun. I'm having fun on Grindr." Then the messages got darker. He messaged me the next day, "I'll kill you. I promise you that." And then another message, "I know where you live," sending me a Google Street photo of my previous address, my grandparents' house. The message continues, "I'll hunt you down. I'll kill you. But first, I'll have some fun with you for a good long time. Then I'll chop you up into little pieces." I had enough. Being a stalker asshole is one thing. Ignoring the warnings to cease impersonating me and threatening me is another thing. I called the local police department from his area, as he tried to use what I assumed to be real photos on his profile, and I was able to find him on Facebook, though it may not have been his real name and the photos, considering he had half a dozen of Facebook profiles with this name and the same photos, but with different info on each, to the tune of "I'm a former Marine" on one, and "I work in the U.S. Marshal Service" on another. Upon contacting the local Colorado Police Department from the area he located himself being from in his messages and his profile, the lady on the line told me that there's not much they can do, as jurisdiction would be the place that the crime was committed in, my state and my area, not where he's committing the crimes from. She told me to contact my local authorities, and good luck. I proceeded to file a police report to my local sheriff's office here in my county in Oregon, but after a few months, have not received a response. Even after calling now, they state their cases are backed up due to COVID. He harassed me for a few more months and I have documented it all, and still to this day I receive dozens of messages of people claiming someone is using my photos to catfish them, literally around the country on Grindr. The story takes place about 2 weeks ago, but I'll start back to a year ago when I joined Reddit to give a little background. I created a Reddit about a year ago and was new to the whole scene. Due to this, I didn't think anything about including my first name in my username. Now, more of a veteran on Reddit, I realized this was a mistake. I never made a new Reddit because I already was so deep on here that starting over sounded miserable until this event. About 2 weeks ago, I woke up to a new chat request on Reddit. I clicked on it, wondering who was trying to message me since I had not posted in a few days. Upon clicking on it, I read a message saying, "Are you John Smith, who was a clerical staffer at Chase Bank in Seattle?" Name, city, position, and company changed for discretion. My heart sank as I read it because they had gotten my full name and city correct. Thankfully, they had found someone else within the city that had a different career than I did, and they did not actually find me. But I wonder what would happen if they really did. Surely they could find my address online with just a few clicks on their phone. I'm not sure how they figured out my city or my last name, but it was enough for me to start a new Reddit. Not exactly the scariest, but just enough to make me watch my back extra carefully. I'm a 23-year-old female, and this happened to me when I was in secondary school, probably around 15 or 16. One of my friends said she had a friend who had seen my pictures and wanted to speak to me. I said okay. Being an insecure mid-teen female, any attention was welcome in my mind. We started talking on Twitter, and we got on pretty well. I asked if he had a Facebook, and they said no because some security issue within the family. I didn't think anything of it, and carried on chatting with him. He said he had multiple siblings, around 5 or 6 if I remember correctly, and his brother was chatting away to a couple of my friends. We were all quite excited as there were new people, and not just the regular guys at school. I would stay over at my friend's house and he would send us voice notes, which I later found out were from YouTube clips from some random guy's channel. There was another time that my friend and I were in a local town together with one of the girls that his brother was speaking to, and they were messaging saying that they could see us. We didn't see them obviously, and after that we started to talk about how weird it all was. Where did they come from? She never mentioned them before they sent the photos. It was just all very odd. We told the other girls who were speaking to them, and they agreed how weird it was. We started to ignore the messages and carry on with our lives. After a couple weeks, my friend, who had introduced us, started acting really upset and worried. She said their whole family had been in a car accident, and a pretty bad one. Obviously, we were a bit worried and believed her because of how distraught she was. She even took time out of class, and I would go to comfort her. While I was with her, I was messaging the guy to try to get details since she wasn't giving us any. She was on her phone next to me, frantically texting, and as soon as she was done with her message, I would get a ping on my phone, and again, and again. It finally clicked in my head, but I couldn't believe it. I told my other friends and they were all as shocked as me, but none of us have spoken to her in years. Our supposed friend catfished a number of us, flirting with us, making us feel special. She came up with elaborate stories as to why they didn't have any other socials, how she knew them, and how they almost died to try to get out of her lies. We all kind of forgot about it, but I think about it sometimes and it seriously gives me the creeps. I just can't think of an explanation for it. It's so weird to me, and to catfish your friends? That's just so fucked up. So I was selling a dress on Facebook that I no longer plan to wear. A man answered. According to his profile, he was about 35 to 40 years old. He asked me about the size and said that he wanted to buy it for his wife for her birthday. Everything seemed normal. I gave him my address to come pick up the dress. When he appeared at my front door, he pushes me inside and closes the door behind him. I thought, what the hell? Is he gonna rob me? but he was planning something worse. "You're more beautiful than in the picture." My blood immediately froze. I started screaming, panicking, threatening him to leave immediately or I'd call the police, and I was so lucky that my neighbor next to me was on the terrace and heard everything and immediately came to my rescue. The guy quickly ran away, and later I got a message to apologize because he thought I was a whore. I didn't believe his apology, but since then I've never sold anything on the internet, let alone sent someone my address. My brother and his wife sell a lot of stuff on Facebook, and she's the one that handles most of the transactions. This one time, they sold some furniture and set up a pickup point for the buyer because they didn't want to give up their home address to a complete stranger. I helped my brother load up his truck and rode with him to make the delivery in a parking lot. So obviously, the buyer thought that my brother's wife would be the one to do it alone. He kept saying that he would be there anytime and asked several times which vehicle she was driving. Then after a while, no cars were entering the parking lot, and he said he had just arrived. We started driving around the small parking lot and spotted this old car with tinted windows on the far end, and there was someone inside. That car had already been there when we arrived. We kept driving and the car immediately drove away like it was being chased. After that, the buyer stopped responding. He obviously thought a woman would be delivering it by herself. If you sell or buy anything on Facebook, never give your home address and never make a delivery by yourself. Only God knows what would have happened if she would have made that delivery all by herself. The following took place just after I turned 18. I work at a mall, so I encounter plenty of people every day. This particular encounter took place 4 years ago. I opened the store and began my daily tasks, such as reading and responding to emails and changing the signs to match the deals that were going on that day. It was a quick shift because it was only a part-time job. I clocked in and 4 hours later I clocked out and went to my college classes. Nothing particularly strange happened that day that stood out to me. Just the usual, helping customers find items that they're looking for and ringing them up. It wasn't until a few days later when I was sitting at a restaurant with my boyfriend and my phone was buzzing like crazy. The girls in my work group chat were going nuts over a screenshot of a man's post on Craigslist. When I opened the image, the man was describing his encounter with me in the store in the missed connections on Craigslist. Apparently, I had helped him find items for his daughter, rung him up, and he left without any crazy alarms going off in my head. As I sat in the restaurant with my boyfriend, thinking back to my shift a few days prior, I thought back to a couple of the men that it could have been that day. For the next couple weeks, I watched my back at work. I made sure I carefully examined each person, especially men. This was my first job, and because I was 18, I didn't have a lot of experience with people constantly checking me out on the innocent end of the spectrum, or stalking me on the more extreme end. This whole experience still has me looking over my shoulder, not for that same man, but for any other person that may slip under my radar and go unnoticed as a total creep. I no longer wear a name badge, and my coworkers know not to give up my schedule. Just kinda makes you think.
"3 years ago, I tried Tinder for the first time. I was 25 at the time, and while most 25-year-old women have dabbled on Tinder or the like, I hadn't been single since I was 17. I met my ex while I was still in high school. 6 years later, we got married. Had a baby. I was happy. But those last couple of years together, he had really begun to resent me and the family we had created together. I fought to keep our relationship together, but the abuse became more frequent and more intense. It got to the point where I took our baby and fled the house in the middle of the night. My mind was scarred, and my heart was raw. It was a really difficult time in my life. A couple of months after I left, I had a new home, a new job, and a renewed sense of life. I was starting to open up and could feel myself healing. I was, however, lonely. I was adjusting to shared custody and spent my weekends alone. I didn't want to jump into a relationship, but I did want to experience some of the things my 8-year relationship hadn't allowed me to. Joining Tinder felt fun. It was new and scary, and after so much drama, it felt nice to have so much positive attention. My self-worth was low, so the cheap compliments and instant gratification of the app felt incredible. Who am I to deserve their attention? Why would they choose to speak to me of all women? Not my healthiest coping mechanism, but I wanted to feel desirable. That's when I met Derek. Derek was an unassuming, average guy. He was cute enough, but not so attractive that I felt self-conscious. Derek and I shared a few interests: craft beer, hiking, and he had a sense of humor that I liked. We agreed to meet up at a local restaurant. I was so nervous. My first date in 8 years. I donned my cutest dress, got made up, and headed out. As I waited in the restaurant, my palms were sweaty, my heart was fluttering, and I began to question myself. He arrived and everything was awkward at first. We ordered our first beers and started to break the ice. As soon as the buzz of the alcohol began to hit, our conversation took off. We had relaxed in each other's company, and the rest of the date went smoothly. We joked about karaoke across town. He laughed about how he didn't like karaoke. I'm a huge fan of it. While no superstar, I've spent a good amount of time in choirs and can carry a tune well enough. One of my favorite rowdy weekend activities is going to that bar and busting out some songs with a sweet taste of gin on my tongue. I convinced him to go with me, and we left the restaurant. We sang into the night, taking shots, flirting, laughing. We ended the night in his truck, clumsily fumbling with each other's buttons and zippers, hearts racing with excitement. This had been what I needed. We texted back and forth more often, and soon, we were talking about another date. I had enjoyed our time together, and liked that I didn't feel a deep connection with him. It was fun, but that was it. Because my heart wasn't tangled up in feelings, he felt safe. We decided for our second date that we would go tubing down a river that runs through our town. We had parked his orange truck at the end of the tubing run, and took the tubes in my truck upriver. We agreed that he would zip my truck key within his pocket into his shorts, and that he would drop me off at my truck afterwards. Bright summer heat warmed our skin, and the water felt crisp and fresh on our toes. The afternoon slipped past as we floated down the river. When we reached the bottom, we deflated our tubes and headed back to my truck. Only, when Derek reached into his pocket, his face sank. He looked at me and said, "Your key is gone." I laughed. Surely he was joking. He insisted this wasn't a joke. Gravity pulled at my stomach and I began to panic. This was the only copy of my truck key, and I had taken it on the river. I felt foolish and worried about how I would get a new key if we couldn't find it. The river was long. We had been tubing for hours. We'd stopped at several places to swim. He offered to drive me home and I accepted. During the drive, we made a plan to meet up the next day to search for my key at some of the stops we had made. We spent the next afternoon combing our swimming holes for my key. Up and down we swam, with very little hope that we would ever see my keys. We had to try, though, and we kept at it. From one spot to another we drove, we swam, and we moved on. At the very last place we checked, as the light of afternoon faded into a hazy orange, something caught his eye. Underwater near the shore were my keys. We were elated and could not believe our luck. To celebrate, We went back to his place for some drinks. He drove me down a long, wooded driveway, and at the very end was a shaded trailer. He told me that he was only renting a room here from an elderly couple, but they were on vacation, so we would be alone. We walked over the creaking porch and entered the trailer. Inside, I could see the kitchen was messy. Not just a couple of dishes, but every surface was covered with mess. He ushered me away to show me his room. It was small, and not very clean either. Dirty clothes, mattress on the floor, a Rubbermaid bin with some snacks like Doritos and cheap, warm beer. We had sex, the yellow light of the trailer accentuating the stains on the walls. Afterwards, the spark of fun I had felt when we first met had withered, and I felt gross. I decided that it would be our last date. A week passed, and we hardly texted. Our brief fling was ending, and I didn't expect to see him again. My mind moved on to other things. The coming weekend, my friends were coming to town, and I was excited. We made plans to go to karaoke together on Saturday night. When the day arrived, I was surprised to see a text from Derek on my phone. "Are you going to karaoke tonight?" it read. I responded that I was, and he texted back that he would be there. "I thought you didn't like karaoke," I asked him, and he said that he had been invited by a girl he worked with, and thought he should give me a heads up that he would be with a date, in case I was there. I thanked him for taking the time to let me know, reassured him that I wouldn't be bothered at all, and said that I hoped he had a great date. Around 9:30 that night, my friends and I arrived at the bar. The dim lights and reflective foil stars, an all too familiar scene. We got our drinks and picked a booth with a good view of the stage. I had a strange sensation, like someone was watching me. I turned my head, scanning the bar, and our eyes locked. Derek and his date were a few booths away, and he was watching us. He waved zealously with a big smile. His date turned around to look, and I managed an awkward wave. I was absolutely fine with him being on a date, but I didn't want to advertise that we knew each other or make his date uncomfortable. My friends were all well aware of the time we had spent together, my thoughts on the experience, and the texts he had sent me earlier. We were all thinking it was a bit odd that he would go out of his way to interact with me in front of his date. But no harm, no foul. He was just being friendly. The evening carried on, and we all had a great time, basking in the atmosphere, drinking in the songs and laughter. A couple of hours in, we were sitting in our booth when Derek stumbled over to our table with his date. He introduced her as Kate and plopped down beside me, pulling her down into our booth next to him. The strong smell of alcohol oozed off of them, and I could see they were hammered. It became obvious they had both had too much to drink. Their eyes were glazed, and words were slurred. Kate seemed really nice despite her state, and she launched into a drunken story to the whole table. My friends and I were fairly uncomfortable, and were unsure of what was going on. Under the table, I felt Derek's sticky hand slide onto my thigh. His date was right there, and I was stunned. Without making a scene, I subtly removed his hand and excused myself to get another drink. As I walked across the room, I could feel his eyes raking my back, and sure enough, when I turned around, he was watching. When I got back, Kate was slurring that her taxi had come. She and Derek exchanged a sloppy kiss and goodnights, and then it was just us and Derek. Derek's mood shifted after that. He was drunkenly unaware of how uncomfortable the table was, and we could tell he was brooding about his date having left without him. Derek turned his attention to me. He slung his heavy arm over my shoulder and leaned in, his sour breath managing to come together to form clumsy sentences. "You're so cute. I love your laugh." I was rigid and just wanted him to leave. When he got up to get another beer, my friends and I spoke about the situation, one of them remarking, "You know you can do better than this, right?" I said that yes, as casual as this had been, I had made a mistake. We came to the conclusion it would be best if we ended the night early, as we didn't see him leaving me alone. As a backup plan, if anything went south, we agreed that the girls would go to the bathroom and leave out the back door, while our male friend would distract him and slip away. Derek arrived back at the table, sloshing his beer onto his front. He slurred, "Where are we going next?" I hesitated, but my friend told him that we would all be going home. Derek said he would walk us there, and we politely declined. He was leaning up against a wall and barely holding himself up at this point. We asked him how he was going to get home, and if we could call him a cab. Derek drunkenly pouted that he could just come to my place with me. Trying to shut him down as politely as I could, I told him that my child was there with a sitter, so I couldn't have him over. He didn't need to know that wasn't true. He refused a taxi and said he would just sleep in his truck. Since his eyelids were drooping and looking at the rest of his state, it seemed reasonable that he would be able to fall asleep in a truck, and we accepted that answer. As we started to leave, he fumbled after us. We stopped and reminded him that we were going to bed. He argued again that he should come with me. My friends and I locked eyes. It was time to engage with our backup plan. The two girls and I excused ourselves to the washroom, while our friend distracted him. Slipping out the back door, the cool rush of night air hit us, and we hurried to the path that led to their hotel. Our friend caught up to us and said he had left Derek behind at the bar. We were all relieved to be out of there and started to walk back to their hotel. One of the girls was sober and offered to drive me home when we got to the hotel, and I accepted. A few minutes down the path, my phone begins to ring. I looked at the caller ID and felt my stomach drop. It was Derek. I turned the volume down and let it ring, and to my surprise, he left a voicemail. I turned on the speaker and played it out loud. Derek's voice sounded confused as his words melted together into the phone. "Where are you guys? I thought we were gonna hang out. I don't understand." We were all glad we had left, and agreed that this had been wild. That's when the phone rang again. Another voicemail popped up on my screen. In the dim light of the trail, I played the new voicemail aloud once more. His drunken speech was more intense this time, as he launched into how he didn't understand why I had left. I had hurt his feelings, and he was in love with me. The tone of his voice shook me when I heard him say, "I love you." There was something dark and heavy about it that left me feeling unsettled. We were all creeped out, but happy to see the bright sign of the hotel ahead. We traveled the carpeted hallway to the room, so my friend could grab her keys to take me home. As we entered the room, my phone began to ring again. This time, the voicemail sent shockwaves of fear throughout my body. Derek's voice had taken on an edge, as he repeated that he loved me, but he was actually really fucking mad at me for leaving him at the bar. He went on about how could I do that to him. He didn't know what he was going to do. His voice shook with anger, as he stumbled over himself expressing how I had betrayed him. The last thing he said before hanging up echoed in the hotel room. "You know, I'm really starting to fucking hate you. This guy was unhinged and I was terrified. I was grateful this side of Derek hadn't shown up when we were alone in his secluded trailer. My friends gave me a hug and told me to call them if I needed anything, and to keep them updated. My friend took me home, and as I unlocked the door and stepped into the comfort of my home, I felt exhausted. It had not been the night out I expected, and Derek's erratic behavior had really freaked me out. Fresh out of an abusive relationship, his actions at the bar, then the voicemails rang some all too familiar bells. That's when I saw the headlights. It was very late for anyone to be driving down my street. I peeked through the curtain. My blood ran cold and I trembled. Sitting in the cab of his orange truck was Derek. Mind racing, I panicked. This dude could barely hold himself up when he left. He was blackout obliterated. How did he drive across town to my house? How did he find me? I immediately remembered the other week when he dropped me off after my keys were lost. How could I have been so stupid? I barely knew him. We'd only met 3 times. Derek's face was stony and etched with rage as he sat in the dark cab staring at my house. He wasn't getting out. He was just staring, while I was on my hands and knees peeking out of the window. All the lights were off inside. I was sure he couldn't see me. Then the screen on my phone lit up. He was calling me again. I quickly hid it so he wouldn't see the light. Hands shaking, I played the voicemail as quietly as I could. Derek only said one thing this time, a phrase that sent terror shooting down my spine. In a drunken sing-song voice, almost taunting me, he quietly said, "Where are you?" Click. I was terrified. Somehow I hadn't really considered I could be in danger, and chalked up all of the fear to my past experiences. Surely I was overreacting, and it was my fault for reading too much into this. I shouldn't be this scared, and I don't want to make a scene. That last voicemail sealed the deal. I figured even if I was overreacting, at the very least he was a drunk driver. I called 911 and the dispatcher said someone would be there in a couple of minutes. As I peeked out of the window, I saw him get out of his truck. He was done waiting. His heavy feet stumbled as they hit the pavement, and he looked around. Derek's voice cut through the night. He started yelling my name. The wild anger in his voice was tangible through the walls, and he just yelled into the street, "Where are you?" Derek started to stumble towards my house when the flashing red and blue lights cascaded down the street, lighting up his face and highlighting every ounce of rage carved into his features. 2 police cars pulled up, and the officers got out. I was still peeking out from inside my dark house, and couldn't hear much of what was happening. I watched them breathalyze him, which he obviously failed. The officers inspected his truck. They all spoke for a while, and one of the officers came to my door. I spoke to him about what had happened, and he was very empathetic. He said as unsettling as his actions had been, there wasn't much they could do without a direct threat. The officer let me know that they would be taking him in for the night, and he would be charged with drunk driving, but that he would be out tomorrow, and to make sure I kept my doors locked and stayed safe. The tow truck came to remove his orange truck from the road, and I could see him arguing. The officers weren't having any of it, and they turned him around to cuff him. As the handcuffs locked around his wrist, he yelled out one last time, looking directly at the window I was peeking out of. "I know you're in there. My name. Why don't you come out to say goodnight?" As quickly as my street filled up, it was empty. The quiet shadows of late nights swallowing the earlier chaos into nothingness. Derek texted me the next afternoon. I'm very sorry about last night. I was in a bad place. I responded that his actions were unacceptable, and how dare he show up at the house my child lives at, and that I would prefer not to hear from him again. He apologized one last time, and I haven't heard from him since. Over the next few months, I would see him on a bike going to and from his workplace, so I know he lost his license. I was always wary that we would bump into each other, which thankfully never happened. I can only imagine how much angrier he was that night after I lost him his license. I found out that he moved to the mainland a while back, which was quite a relief for me, and I no longer feel as on edge around town. So, Derek, let's never meet again.
This is a shorter story, but I think it fits here. I had just turned 18 at the time, and after getting out of a shitty high school romance, I figured I'd give Tinder a try. I didn't really plan on going on any dates. I just wanted to talk to new people, and then maybe someone would pique my interest. Let me set the scene. It's my senior ball. I'm all glammed up in my vintage dress and having a pretty good time, despite not having a date. The night was calming down, so I was sitting on my phone while a slow song played. I opened my Tinder to see if I had any new matches, and I did. A guy who was decently attractive and only a year older than me asked if I wanted to go on a date. I declined, but he seemed pretty insistent. To be fair, it wasn't a very harsh no, because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. He then proceeds to spam me with different date ideas. I tried to ignore it and just go back to my friends. I checked my phone maybe 15 minutes later, and he had sent me pictures of an empty school parking lot that was maybe 2 blocks away from the reception hall I was at. He was asking me to meet him there and said that he would bring drinks and we could get drunk together. I told him no. He asked if Walmart would be better. I proceeded to block him and didn't pick up the app for a little while after. This was a while ago, so my memory of that night is a bit spotty, so I probably missed some details that would make this a little creepier. So it's 2011, and I'm newly divorced. I'm in my mid-20s and a single mother. I decided to try out some online dating sites. I start talking with this guy on one of the sites. We seem to have a lot in common, and he seems pretty normal. I decide to give him my phone number. We continue chatting via text and phone calls. Well, I suggest to go get some coffee and meet up. He states he doesn't drink coffee. Okay. I suggest we have drinks at the bar. He says he doesn't drink alcohol. Then he has a great idea. Let's go for a hike. I reluctantly agree. This was the first red flag. He wants to go to this place called Batstu in South Jersey, which is a historic village with old abandoned buildings, hiking trails, and the home of the New Jersey Devil. Great place for a first date. So I suggest we meet up at the main parking lot, and he has a better idea. He says let's meet at the train station nearby, and he'll drive us over, because he knows another entrance with better hiking trails. Second red flag. I, again, reluctantly agree, not wanting to be rude. So the day of the date comes, and for whatever dumb reason, I didn't tell anyone I was doing this. I think because I was embarrassed for using a dating site, and I knew somewhere in the back of my mind my friends would have tried to talk me out of it. So I pull up to the train station, and he's in a late 90s Bronco. Okay, not so bad. We can't all afford newer cars. He gets out, and he's actually the guy from the pictures. Okay, initial sigh of relief. We get in the car, and he starts to head to the secret hiking trail entrance. We have a nice conversation on the way there. All seems good. We get there, and as soon as we get out of the car, I go to grab my phone. He says, "No, just leave it here. I have mine." Red flag, waving in my fucking face. Again, being polite and not wanting to argue, I comply. I see the entrances, and one directs you towards a village and humanity, so I naturally suggest that one. He says no, and points to the other trail that goes God knows where. I again, being the good girl I am, say, okay. Right before we set off, a bit of rebellion sets in. You know, I should really have my phone with me. He starts to argue, and I'm like, no, I need it in case the babysitter calls about my son. He gives in and unlocks his car, and I grab my phone. We set off down the trail, side by side. We are talking, and everything seems okay. I start thinking, I was overreacting before. All is good. We get to the part of the trail where you can only go one by one, so I say, you go first, and I'll follow. He says, oh no, you go, so in case you trip or anything, I can grab you. I do that nervous giggle thing, and politely decline, saying how bad I am at following paths. He insists I go first, in a stern voice. Red flags with sirens. But I simply comply. The trail is getting narrower by the second, and the woods are getting darker because of the amount of trees and brush. We are no longer talking, and the only sounds are the crunching of our footsteps. Panic starts setting in. I look back at him, and he's just got a scowl on his face and a dead look in his eyes. I try to smile at him, but nothing. So I stop and say, let's turn back. I like it better when we could walk next to each other and talk, still being polite. He says he wants to keep going this way. So I say, no really, I want to go back the other way. And I start to do just that. As I walk past, he grabs my arm and blocks my path. I don't say anything and just casually grab my phone out of my pocket. He lets me go, saying, fucking whatever, and we walk back towards the car in silence, me with my phone in my hand the whole time. Amazingly, I did have a signal. As we reach the clearing where the cars are parked, he looks at his watch and states he has to go now. He has somewhere he needs to be. We were only on the date for less than an hour, but okay, I'm not complaining. For whatever dumb reason, I get back in his car. We drive in almost silence the entire way back to my car, me with a death grip on my phone, and him looking miserable. He drops me off at my car and speeds away. I never heard from him again. Me being naive, I want to believe that there was no chemistry between us. But let's be honest, when I decided to fuck politeness and grab my phone that day, I spoiled his dastardly plans. This happened to me my freshman year of college. Tinder was new, and everyone at my university was on that app. I joined to see what all the fuss was about. Looking through profiles, I found a few guys that were really interesting. This one guy in particular caught my eye. We will call him Walter. I swipe right on Walter, and we match. I was excited and kinda giddy because he was super attractive. He messages me, and I get butterflies in my stomach. We message on the app for maybe an hour. Typical conversation is happening. I ask him what he does for a living, and he asked me what my major was. Harmless conversation. After a while, he asked me for my number so we could text instead of messaging on the app. I gave it to him. He seemed nice enough. We messaged back and forth for a few days. Lots of flirty conversations and plans to hang out finally occurred. By the fourth day of our conversation, he started calling me babe, which gave me mixed feelings. It was cute, but also a little weird. We didn't really know each other and had never met. I ignored it and continued on with the conversations. He started saying he wanted to be exclusive and he really wanted to see me in person. He was begging me at this point to come to his apartment to cuddle and watch movies with him and his dog. I told him that our first date needed to be in public and I would not be going to some stranger's apartment. He said I was overreacting and kept begging. I decided to ignore him for the rest of that night. The next day he apologized and said he understood why we needed to meet in public. So we made plans that weekend. The weekend came faster than I expected, and it was the day we were supposed to meet. Something just felt off, and I decided to back out. I texted him apologizing, saying my mom wasn't feeling well and needed me to come home to help her with some house chores. This made him annoyed, and he said, "Your mom is a big girl. If she needs you, she can just call you. Just come over, and you can leave whenever to go help her. I really want to see and kiss you." I told him no, that I would be staying with my mom that weekend, and that was that. I only lived about 30 minutes from home, so I actually do go home to see my mom that day. After what he said about my mom, I started ignoring him, and the text started rolling in. Text after text. "Babe, I'm sorry. Please come over. Babe, I miss you. Are you gonna come over?" I planned on replying the next day that I was just busy with my mom. Then he started calling me. I had a total of 45 missed phone calls within a 2-hour period. He left voicemails saying that he was sorry and that he just missed me and wanted me to call him back. Similar voicemails continued almost the entire time I was home. My roommate texted me shortly after I finished dinner with my mom and asked if we could go out that night. I agreed and went back to my university dorm. Suddenly, the calls from Walter started increasing again. More texts, voicemails, and he started messaging me again on Tinder, asking me why I wasn't replying to him. I wasn't planning on replying until I got a message on Instagram that said, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming back to town tonight?" Getting this message really freaked me out. I replied to him and said, "Sorry, I've been busy with my mom. How did you know I was back in town?" He said, "Well, I checked your Tinder, of course." Tinder doesn't show exact locations, but has a within 1 mile message. This really freaked me out, and I messaged him back saying that he was being real creepy. He seriously had to be constantly refreshing my profile to see the distance change. The messages, calls, and voicemails continued. All were him apologizing for making me feel weird about him knowing where I was. He was just worried about me. We had been texting for less than a full week. I told my roommate about it, and so we decided to stay in for the night. The last straw for me was getting a message saying, "Look, I'm really sorry. I'm outside your dorm with flowers and chocolate. Please forgive me." Oh hell no. I called the campus security and told them about this guy, but they never found anyone waiting outside my doors. I'm assuming he was in his car waiting for me to reply. I blocked him on all my socials, phone number, deleted Tinder, and haven't been back on since. I have seen him once, out and about in town, but he didn't recognize me, thankfully. Walter, if you read this, I'm glad we never met. Thanks for making me second guess every single guy I find attractive. So I'm not sure how many people know what FetLife is, but basically it's a fetish BDSM social media site. Facebook for those into kink, basically. It was used a lot for hookups, dating, but I was primarily into it to read some short erotica that were posted in forums sometimes, and finding more like-minded friends. But I did eventually branch out and meet some people off of there. Most of them were really cool, others not so much. They were just kind of boring. All in all, it was pretty okay. But after talking to this one guy and meeting up with him only once, I got really bad vibes and decided not to go any further. He just creeped me out for some reason. He was not ready to give up. Things went quiet for a while, and then 2 weeks later I kept getting harassing messages from blank accounts that I'm assuming were his, as they all had different variations of the same screen name, but words and letters arranged in different order. They were pretty harmless things like, "Why don't you love me? I thought we had something special. Hello? please talk to me. Things of that nature. Annoying, but not dangerous. Well, one day he shows up to my work. Now I did work at a McDonald's, so it isn't that weird. And luckily I work in the back at the drive-thru. I only really saw him out of the corner of my eye when I went up to the front to grab cups, and I don't think he recognized me. I had shaved my head. It was trendy at the time, and when I met him I had a wig on. I never told him that I had shaved my head either. But as I was walking back, he called out my name. I rushed into the back and told my manager, and he got asked to leave. I didn't see or hear from him for 2 weeks afterwards. I get another message from a totally new unnamed account, but this one was much more sinister, and I knew it was him. It had to be. When he found out I was dating someone new, he got angry and threatened to expose me. I didn't work at McDonald's, so he didn't know where I worked anymore, but he knew where I went to school, the names of my mother and sister, and knew where they worked. He knows what shops I shop at, which friends I hang out with the most. He didn't know her name, but he gave me a really detailed description of how she looked, and he says that he knows where I live. Luckily, nothing happened, and I moved soon after, and never heard from him again. But needless to say, I was very spooked out, and it scared me away from online dating for good. I made a police report, so maybe that scared him away. This happened about 2 years ago, when I tried to get into the dating scene using Bumble after my first relationship ended. This guy, we'll call him Kyle, was one of my first matches on the app. Everything went smoothly. He seemed very nice and goal-oriented. After about 2 weeks of talking, we decided to finally meet up. The whole date was a disaster. I'll sum up everything he did during it. I know some of you will ask, but I didn't have a license or a card to bail, as much as I wish I did. My brother drove me to the meeting spot. Kyle took me to a little airport cafe, since it's right next to our basic 3-seated airplane airport. He began talking about his ex and how she was pregnant. He went into detail about the hospital fees he paid, thinking that it was his kid, until the baby was born. She had cheated on him based off of a very different skin color of the baby, that it obviously couldn't be his. Then Kyle began to talk about his mother, who had some problems as she liked to tase her kids, including him, and watch them seize up. He told me that he had health problems from this. Then he began to talk about getting his pilot's license, and how he always wanted to propose to someone in a plane. Literally the next thing he said was, "So have you ever been up in one of those little planes?" With a wink. Then continued to say that he was in a midlife crisis and planned to die at 40, but that I had given him a reason to live. After we ate, we left. The day continued, as Kyle said that there was nothing to do in my town, and he wanted to drive 2 hours away to the next big one, where there's more stuff to do. I declined, and he changed his intent with actually wanting to see his friend down there. I told him that I would be okay if he dropped me off at a local store and he could go by himself. He got upset and pretended to turn around and head back into my town. Then Kyle pulled over on the side street with many houses and asked if I would like to practice driving. I said no, of course, because I hadn't even read the little book that DMVs give out, and his car was one of those expensive Mustangs. I wasn't going to crash it. Then he pouted, said he needed gas, and on to the gas station we went. When we get to the gas station, he asked about my previous relationships. I said it wasn't something that I would talk to someone that was so new, and clarified it wasn't a good one. This seemed like a good time to leave, as even though it's a gas station with only pumps, I could easily walk to the store and call my brother. But of course, Kyle wouldn't have that. He locked me in the car. I got frantic trying to find the lock to pull or push, but there weren't any. He said that he only had locks on his side, and he wanted to know about my ex. I began to have an anxiety attack and scratched at my head, hyperventilating, crying. He simply sat there and watched me do it without saying a word. After about an hour, I finally could breathe calmly and told him my ex was a friend that I had known for 9 years. Then after the relationship started, he became abusive. He simply responded with, "Okay," and let me out. I called my brother a few times and he didn't pick up, and I wanted to get home, so I agreed to let him drive me home, with a plan of dropping me off near a neighbor's house because I didn't want him knowing where my parents lived. After he dropped me off, he messages me on the app about how I ruined the date and made it awkward and that I was weird. I confronted him about how uncomfortable and scared he made me feel, which he responded with, "Okay," and then unmatched me. I deleted the app after and didn't re-download it for another 6 months to try again, but it was the most terrifying day of my life. This happened a few years ago. I'm a female and was 20 years old. I had just gotten into the Tinder scene and was pretty new to the whole thing. One of my first matches I had was this guy named Zach. Zach seemed super cool and we messaged back and forth on the platform about video games, anime, and about generic other things in our lives for about a week. Finally, Zach asked if we could meet up. I figured enough time had gone by and he hadn't given me any red flags, so I said yes. We set a date for the next day, and then I made my first big mistake. I gave him my address to pick me up. Looking back on this now, I realize how stupid I was to do that, and things could have gone a lot worse than they did. The next day comes, and I spend much of the morning nervously getting ready for my first real Tinder date. Thankfully, my roommate Sarah was also home with me and experienced the whole ordeal. About 30 minutes before Zach was supposed to pick me up, Sarah and I watched 2 cars pull up in front of our 4-unit apartment building. 3 of these redneck-looking, creepy countrymen get out. They looked to be about 40, so Sarah and I paid them no mind. The next thing we know, we hear loud banging on the main door. Our building is locked unless you are a tenant, so they clearly didn't belong. Me being as naive as I was, thought that they were there for one of the other building residents and stupidly opened the door to ask them who they were looking for. The guy in the middle said, "We're here for..." At that moment, I went from friendly to confused to scared. I didn't like the way they were looking at me. I told him that was me. Third mistake. He gave me the creepiest once over and said, "Oh yes, you look just like your pictures." This sent a chill down my spine, and I demanded to know who they were and what they wanted. The guy in the middle said that they were friends with Zach and that they were here to pick me up for our date. I asked him where Zach was. He just snickered and said, "He's in the car," and pointed to the second car, which was strategically parked behind a tree, so I couldn't see if Zach was actually in there or not. Luckily, I'm not that stupid. I told him that if Zach wanted me to go out to the car, then he could come and get me himself. Then the guy on the right steps up and asked if I would like to get with him. I went to shut the door, but he shoved his boot into the frame before I could close it. The man on the right then says, "If you won't fuck me, fuck my buddies at least." At that moment, Sarah comes out of the lobby, yanks me into our apartment, and locks the door. They banged on the door for a few minutes, and Sarah called the cops. They left shortly after, and we watched from the living room as they got back into the cars and drove away. There was nobody else in the car. What's even worse is, a couple hours later, I got a message from Zach saying, "I'm so sorry. My friends took my phone and thought that they would play a prank on me. Don't worry, you'll see that I'm a good guy when we actually meet." I blocked him instantly and deleted my Tinder. The cops couldn't do anything because I didn't get their names or license plate, so I never did find out what happened to those guys. This was in November in Scotland. I was desperate, I must admit. I had been single and alone for some time, and it was driving me crazy. That's when I met Laura. She came across as a very sweet girl and all, but she was in a hurry to meet me. So I did. She insisted that we go to a pub and no fancy dates were necessary, and I didn't mind that. At first glance, I knew I'd been swindled. She looked different from what I saw before, but I didn't really mind. I was just happy to have a date, and I'm not exactly good looking myself. I gave her a chance to redeem herself. We got talking, and after a few beers, things started to get more intimate. Before I go any further, she was quite an overweight girl with long dark hair, and she had eyeshadow similar to Amy Winehouse, and she said that she was a huge fan. I asked her about her hobbies and interests, but she asked me to talk more about myself. I told her about my job, and she yawned sarcastically. "Let's talk about your sex life," she said. She slipped her foot out of her shoe and started rubbing it on my groin. Needless to say, I was aroused. So yeah, I don't have much to say in that department, and it's been a while since I had sex, so I was very honest with her. I asked her about hers, and she said she has her kinks and that she's done things that I never imagined. "Want to see what I can do?" she said. "Let's go to my place." So at this point, I was starting to feel very drunk, which I was amazed as I was only on my 4th pint. I did have 2 shots though. We waited for a taxi, and she was holding my hand, excitedly whispered into my ear that she was going to do some things that I have never experienced before. In a way, I actually couldn't wait to just sleep. My head felt heavier than the rest of my body. It was like the ground was moving beneath my feet. The rest was a blur. I can't even remember getting into the taxi, but I do remember falling down the stairs, and she was above me, laughing at me. "Come on," she said, "get your sexy ass up here." I struggled up the stairs, and before I know it, from what I remember, I was in her bedroom naked, and it was like I blacked out. I tried to sit up, only to find myself tied to her bed by my arms and legs. Then she entered the room dressed in bondage gear. I was deeply aroused but confused at the same time. She performed sex acts on me before having full intercourse. I laid there in delight, don't get me wrong, but something still felt off about it all. I had dozed off for a bit and had been woken up by a strange screeching sound. "What are you doing?" I said, as she was wrapping my legs in cling film. "Hush now," she said. "This is the best bit." I was no longer tied to the bed, but I felt numb, and I couldn't move my arms or legs. She kept wrapping me up, from my legs upward. I was screaming at her to stop, and she placed some cling film in my mouth to shut me up. I struggled to breathe at this point, and had tried my best to dislodge the ball from my mouth. Eventually, I was totally wrapped up from head to toe. I could barely see out of the cling film. She told me that this was my punishment for being terrible in bed, and that she has many other victims just like me, all wrapped up, waiting to die. She left the room, and I gave out muffled screams. Then I felt myself slowly fading away. I woke up to what was the next day, now able to breathe. This time, people were looking at me. They removed most of the cling film and resuscitated me. I wasn't aware of this till they told me. It turned out that I wasn't actually in Laura's flat, but an old-fashioned hotel. The police were all over, asking me questions about what happened. I attempted to show them her Tinder profile, but she had deleted the page. I'm grateful for my rescuers that had saved me, but I'm forever traumatized by the incident and ended up having panic attacks when I see people similar to her. It took me a few years to finally trust people enough to go on dates, but I'm still on the road to recovery mentally. I'm just glad I'm still alive, but wonder if she's still out there and if there are others like me that didn't make it. When I was in high school, this guy fell in love with me and his friend gave him my Snapchat. I knew who he was. I had spoken to him like twice, so I added him back, not thinking much of it. At the time, Snap Map was new, and I didn't know there was a ghost mode, or whatever it's called, so no one could see your location. We started talking and quickly became friends. I had no idea that he had feelings for me until he asked me out on a date. I nicely declined, making excuses for why I couldn't go, and that's when things started to get creepy. He Googled my street and literally counted how many houses there were before mine so he could find it. Then he sent a picture of my house and said, "Isn't this your house?" I said it wasn't because I was so fucking creeped out, but he continued saying he knew it was. At that time, the idea of him using SnapMap didn't even cross my mind since I was panicking so much. A few days later, I had to go to the drugstore with my mom to get her medicine. I had stopped talking to him, but before I left, he texted me something. I had left him on red since my mom told me to hurry and started walking towards the drugstore. The drugstore was about 20 minutes away from my house. There was a guy I used to like working at the drugstore, so me and my mom were gushing about him, looking at me and smiling. I was 15 years old. When I came back home, I had internet. I didn't have data, so obviously my messages came up. One of them was from him. I opened it and he asked, "Where were you 20 minutes ago?" I answered, nowhere?" He said, "You were at the pharmacy. The worker is cute, isn't he? You have a crush on him." I was so scared and finally realized it was because Snap Maps, so I deactivated it. That was the start of him abusing, stalking, and sexually assaulting me for the next year. Regardless, now that I think about it and understand Snap Maps a lot more, if you don't have data, your position doesn't update. So how did he know where I was? And how did he know I had a crush on that worker? It still creeps me out to this day, but I'd like to believe it's just a coincidence. Okay, so this happened about 4 years ago when I was 16. I was super vain and worried about my appearance. I always wanted to look pretty, so I would go all out when I went out or took pictures. Curled hair, fake lashes, the whole 9 yards. But I've since had kids and have a man that tells me I look beautiful when I look like a hobo and never bother with makeup or anything anymore. Anyways, I had my Snapchat account set to public so anyone could watch my stories or snap me. I always figured if someone is weird or whatever, I can just block them. Yeah, right. Well, one day, I'm out to lunch with my mom when a random dude messages me. He says I'm pretty and all this and that, but being super nice, but I didn't really care to talk to him, so I was just giving him one-word replies, hoping that he would get the hint, because I hated being rude. Then he asked me if I could send him nudes. Absolutely not, and I tell him so. Well, he didn't like that. He told me that I was a whore, and he hated women because they're all a bunch of sluts, and I'm just mad because no one likes me. Okay. I told him that he was a psycho, and laughed at him, and he threatened to sue me for defamation. So I thought that was the end of that. Well, it wasn't. I block dude and go about my day when someone adds me on Snapchat. I look at the user info, and their snap score was a 0, and their username was something really weird. They didn't snap me or anything, but continued to watch my stories every single day. Fast forward a few months, and this person snaps me. I was doing the same one-word replies, cause I really didn't feel like talking. You'd think I would learn from the first time, but nope. He starts with nice small talk, then out of nowhere sends me a couple of different selfies of myself that were posted on my stories months ago. He asks me if I can print them out for him, gives me the size he wants them in, and says he'll give me his address. Hold up, what? I immediately shut it down. Then, this dude sends me a couple pictures of myself, framed in his house, on his wall. Fuck no. I told him off real good and blocked him. Then another account adds me. Another weird username. I remove it and change my account settings. He still has my username, so he adds me from a million different accounts, which I won't add back. They were all super weird usernames. I won't give the actual usernames, but on Snapchat you can choose different display names, and they were all pretty similar to his usernames. One was, "I'm wet." Another was, "Just add me back." Snapchat also tells you how the person added you, via phone number, user search, quick add, etc. They all said user search, so I know he searched it up, and every account had a snap score of 0, so obviously he had just made the account, and I knew it was him. Weird fucker who keeps adding me on Snapchat years later because I won't send him nudes. Let's not meet. I used to have my profile set on private to avoid creepy encounters like this. I put it back on public after a while because of a rally I attended and wanted to put my name out there. One day, I received a text message to my number. He claimed to be a man that saw me on Instagram and thought I was beautiful and wanted to get to know me more. At first, I thought it was just some sick joke one of my friends was pulling on me. But quickly I realized it most likely wasn't because the older man followed me shortly before that text. I didn't see it before the text because I didn't have my notifications on for Instagram. I was skeptical and asked him how he got my number in the first place, and I thought it was really weird. He claimed he got it off of Instagram, off of my email somehow. But I checked my email and my signature didn't have my contact information. But that wasn't the only flaw in his claim. I didn't have any of my personal information displayed on my Instagram in no way, shape, or form. He proceeds to keep texting me, introducing himself really specifically as if we were texting on a dating app, saying he was a woman's doctor or whatnot. As creeped out as I was, I didn't want to be rude and tick him off, so I politely asked him to not contact me because I wasn't interested in being friends or getting to know a man in his 50s that gave me a flimsy idea of how he got my contact information. The conversation went on with him carrying a lot of it and me repeatedly declining his weird and extremely creepy offer. He continued to glorify my ethnicity, culture, and looks, attempting to try to connect with me on some way or another. Eventually, I got really tired of it and started to tell him that I would call the cops and report his number if he didn't stop texting me. He passive-aggressively threatened me, telling me, "You're gonna regret that," bouncing back and forth between that and being passive, saying, "I'm just trying to get to know you better. Please give me a chance. I get lonely. I may be old by age, but everyone says I have the heart of a 19-year-old. I eventually stopped answering, and at this point had already gotten some advice from my friends to block the guy on everything. Hope he was only bluffing in his aggressive threats and that he was just a desperate old man. From then on, I usually take an extra look around me before entering my car, going out, being more careful on social media and whatnot. It was mostly just terrifying how stubborn, unwilling, and aggressive he was towards me, telling him no and that I'm not interested, and how I still don't even have a solid way of knowing how he obtained any of my information. This happened about 6 years ago. I was single and on Bumble. I met Zach, and after talking a bit, agreed to meet. We went to dinner and got on well. He had brought flowers and arranged with the waiters to put them at the table, which I thought was unexpected but nice. He had been to a good school, had a good job, and was polite and funny. He basically checked every box on paper. He told me stories about his friends and family. All seemed totally normal. We went out for drinks after dinner and went home. The next morning I get a text from him. "I had a great time. Let's do it again." Although there was nothing wrong with him, I just didn't feel a spark, so I said, "Thank you so much for the great night," and explained it wasn't really what I was looking for, but had a nice time meeting him. I expected that to be it, or for him to say no worries, but I got another text. What was wrong? Least you can do is give me another chance. He offered drinks nearby. I didn't answer. That's where things took a turn. Zach started sending me extremely long messages. "How dare you do this? We had something really special. I've talked to all my friends, and they said it sounded like it was something special too." He would get angry. "You're selfish and heartless. How can you hurt me like this? The least you can do is answer me." And would then apologize. "I'm so sorry. I'm a good guy. I just feel so strongly about this because I never felt this way before, and I know that this is true love. I need to know why you don't see it too. Please tell me what went wrong. Let me give you the chance to see what I could see." It went on and on. Essay-length messages about how he felt about me and what we could be together. This continued all day every day for about a week, 20 plus long messages a day, and he would constantly call me. By the weekend, I was getting calls almost every 10 minutes. My doorbell had also started ringing constantly. When I would check the door camera, whoever it was crouching down so I couldn't see them. That day, I blocked his number. I didn't get any more surprise visits and moved shortly after. In the following years, I met someone and we had a son together. Life went on. In the last week, I checked my LinkedIn and Instagram. I had 2 new requests, both from Zach. Although you seemingly still want to, Zach, let's not meet again. Never have ever thought that I would have to worry about someone stalking me. This is from a couple years back, so it's hard to get every detail. I'm sorry if it's not perfect. From a young age, I've always been told about stranger danger and such. I actually had Facebook at a really young age because my parents knew I was aware. I only really got it so I could play this game called Yoville. Anyways, I started an Instagram and grew a significant amount of followers. It's kind of scary not knowing who follows you, but I modeled and it never crossed my mind that someone was watching. It all started when I was going on a trip and received a Snapchat from a username Hot Daddy. Okay, nothing to it, right? Sent a picture of his private parts. Weird, but it's nothing new to many girls. I didn't reply and went on with my day. I wasn't paying too much attention to my phone because I was at the zoo, so every now and then I would take a look on my phone and reply to my friends and such. I looked at another message and noticed Hot Daddy again text me saying, "You opened my snap. I wouldn't ever think you would reply. Do you still live on? Insert address." Obviously I was shocked. I wasn't going to say I moved, so I said, yes I did. He explained that he had seen my Instagram photos and me being around town. He named the street that was right by me, so I know he must have lived somewhere down there. He then replied, "I've been seeing you for years and was so nervous to talk to you." I was a little confused, thinking it was a joke from one of my friends. I mean, who would actually stalk? He just said a bunch of weird things that I couldn't wrap my mind around. I asked if he was stalking me or something. This wasn't a friend that I knew, but a part of me wished I was. I was always skeptical of the old house after my dad passed away. It wasn't the nicest neighborhood, and a lot of scary things happened when I lived there. It was only my mom, my 15-year-old brother, and 17-year-old me. Hot Daddy replies, "I've only seen you walking around. I've never stalked you, but I can if you want me to." He also insisted of picking me up and taking me to McDonald's. Mind you, he still thinks I live there. I wanted to make sure it wasn't one of my friends playing a joke on me, so I asked them to send me a picture. It was a man. I blocked him. I don't know if it was a joke, but one of my friends actually lives on that road, and she opened the door one day to a white man, asking to mow her lawn. He exclaimed her, and pushed open the door a little bit, until she replied no. He got her on Snap as well, so I knew he knew what she looked like. He was an easy target to spot because the majority of the people who lived down that road were not white. He also was a construction worker, so it was easy spotting. This was 2 years back, so Hot Daddy, or wherever the hell you are, I hope we never meet. This all happened when I was 19. I'm not the best looking dude, so I never had much luck with women, and ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck there either, until like the 3rd month of using it, when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough that I just dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which is odd because bots almost never message more than once. I clicked on her chat and replied, then looked at her profile. What I saw was pretty generic, but definitely wasn't a bot's profile. We had been talking for about a month when she proposed the idea that I come see her. I was pretty reluctant as she lived 8 hours from me by car, but I had to admit I really did like her quite a bit, and I have been thinking about asking her if I could come see her for a while now. After a bit of badgering from her, I finally said that I would take a drive to go see her. At this point, I had no reason to doubt that she was who she said she was. We had video chatted every other week, called on most days. I just assumed that I got really lucky. Things did get a little weird on the way there though. She kept messaging me, asking me where I was. while making sure I was still coming. At some points, when I took more than 30 minutes to respond, she would send me a slew of annoyed texts. Admittedly, I chalked it up to her being nervous about me coming to see her. I was pretty nervous too, so I couldn't blame her. I had a hard time finding her house at first. The directions she gave me were pretty confusing, and it was back through a series of gravel and dirt roads and a large thicket of trees. It was still midday when I came onto an old-looking house. A window on the second floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned, just worse for wear. Katie's red buggy that she liked to talk about was parked in front of the garage. I took out my phone and texted her that I was here. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of the car to knock on the door, I noticed that someone was looking at me from one of the second floor windows. I found it a little creepy, but figured it was just her father or something. She had told me that he comes to stay with her every now and again, so I ignored it and knocked on her door. She answered with a smile and gave me a kiss, which surprised me, and I followed her inside. We sat down on a couch and started talking about our plans when I asked her about her dad. "You didn't tell me that your dad was here," I said. "Was that going to be a surprise or?" Katie looked confused and told me that her dad wasn't here. I still thought she was keeping up the act and told her that she didn't have to keep pretending and that I had seen him looking through the window at me from the upstairs window. Katie went pale and said, "You gotta get out of here, now." We both ran to our cars. When I questioned Katie, she informed me that her dad wasn't there and that she had been home alone until I showed up. I called the police, and while I was on the phone giving my address, Katie gasped and pointed to the window where I'd seen the guy last. He was looking at us from that window again. I got a better look of him, and he seemed older and frail, almost like he hadn't eaten anything in a while. He left the window after he saw that we saw him. The police took a half an hour to show up, and the whole time Katie was crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot for not keeping her doors locked. When the police finally did show up, one started asking me and Katie questions as the other two searched the house. They came back out a little later and told me and Katie that they didn't find anyone. They did find the back door was hanging open. Whoever it was had ran out into the woods, but the cops were sure that the house was empty. After the cops left, she asked me to stay the night because she was too scared to be alone in the house right now. I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch, as Katie's bedroom was the room that was right next to where the man had been. Katie had also brought out a shotgun that her father had given her, but she has never used. I told her it was fine, the man's gone, but she insisted, saying that she'll feel safer if it's out. I'm glad she did. Later that night, I was still wide awake, watching TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep. From the kitchen, I heard the sound of the doorknob being turned. At this point, I wasn't even scared, I was just pissed. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door, and there he was. The guy that had been at the house before was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I'm glad we had locked the door. The man unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke up Katie, told her what happened, and we called the police yet again. When they arrived, they did a full sweep of the woods, but found no one. They told Katie and me that it's probably a good idea to stay somewhere else for the night. Me and Katie said our goodbyes. She was going to stay at her friend's house, and I was going home. I left a little after Katie did. I was on the phone with my brother telling him what happened. My headlights were on. As I was talking, something caught my eye. The fucking man was standing at the corner of the house, just watching me. I gunned it out of there and didn't even bother calling the police again. However, I did text Katie, and she said she was going to call the cops again. I don't think Katie ever went back to the house alone. I'm a 26-year-old who has lived in Alaska my whole life. This will become important later when you see just how far this person would go to try to be with me. This all happened a few years back when I was in college. Like any woman at my age, I made a grave mistake of attempting online dating. I was using OkCupid to try and find a potential partner, but I also had listed in my bio that I was looking for friends. One day this girl, we'll call her Jen, messaged me. She seemed nice, and we got to talking and really hit it off, but I made it clear at this time I wasn't looking for a relationship due to being preoccupied with work and school. I should preface the rest of the story by saying that I'd like to help people, and it's really hard for me not to. Honestly, it has been the biggest flaw I've had over the years, a contributing factor in multiple abusive relationships I've been in before and since this incident. Anyway, the results of this has been that I tend to drain myself to try to help others, and it attracts unsavory and unstable people. We start going into conversation about our various interests, and eventually we stumble across gaming as a mutual interest. Jen suggests we play a new game, Ark Survival Evolved. It's a cursed rune of games that wasn't very optimized for any system. To be honest, it was an absolute dumpster fire of a game, but at the time I thought it had a lot of potential. So I spent countless hours making various bases and trading dinosaurs. Jenny and I spent a lot of time in the multiplayer, building things and training dinosaurs, and talking and having a good time. During this time, she opened up to me about a lot of the abuse she had suffered in past relationships, and from family that didn't accept her for being gay. Having also been through some difficult times, I felt a lot of empathy for her and would try to build her up and talk her out of self-hating talk when I had the energy to. This is when the trouble started though. I had noticed that she had been a bit too friendly with me and kept being overtly sexual and flirting for a week or two. It all started in the game, roleplay kind of stuff. She was really nice, but totally not my type. I had addressed the situation multiple times, saying that it made me feel very uncomfortable. But every time we had that conversation, Jen would tell me that she understood and would back off. You know the drill. It never got through to her. By this time, we had started having communications on a chat app called Telegram. I wasn't always on my computer, so it seemed like a convenient solution. I started noticing that a lot of the emojis she was using displayed a very similar lack of respect for my boundaries. Just as before, I'd mentioned this to Jen, that it made me feel uncomfortable. I knew she had a lot going on upstairs, but me being me, I have always been a gentle soul. It's always been very difficult for me to set firm boundaries and to keep those, especially when someone is suffering. One weekend was very busy with homework and a double shift at work, so I ended up getting home very late. I booted up my computer just to check some emails as I ate dinner before zonking out. When Steam loaded, I noticed that I had 100 missed messages and comments, all from Jen. About 30 minutes later, my phone starts going off. Mind you, this is at 12 a.m. Alaskan time, so this would have been 3 a.m. for her. She called my cell phone number with what she had saved from Telegram. She was absolutely out of control. From the moment I picked up the phone, she was screaming obscenities and slurs, intercepted with confessions of love and desperate pleas for me to unblock her so that we could be friends again and that she would make it up to me and all that crap. I tried to explain to her that what she had done was out of line and that I just didn't have the emotional capacity to go through another abusive relationship, but she was having absolutely none of it. I did the only thing I could do. I ended the call and blocked her number. 5 minutes later, I get a call from an unrecognized private number and pick up, knowing exactly what I was in for. It was her again, calling from her parents' landline. I immediately hung up. 15 seconds goes by and my phone rings again. I dismissed the call. My phone rang again about 5 minutes later from the same number. This goes on for a solid 15 minutes before I turned off my phone and went to bed. It was a fairly sleepless night, but thankfully the next day I had class in the evening, so I had the opportunity to sleep in. I woke up from my okay sleep and turned my phone on to find over 100 missed calls and about as many voicemails. I checked my Telegram to talk to a different friend about the chaos that was going on to find messages from 6 new accounts. Most of them just off-the-wall texts filled with the same out-of-control ramblings that she had said on the phone. They were the texts of someone who had completely lost it, all over the place, in tone and message, switching back and forth between "I love you" and awful slurs with little regard of spacing, punctuation, capitalization, or general legibility. I was horrified. I mean, I had seen a fair share of breakdowns, but never ones that impacted me directly. Then I got a phone call, same unknown private number, hoping that she had calmed down enough to reason. I picked up the phone and she started sobbing and screaming, starting right back in. Mad as hell, I screamed into the phone for her to shut up, and for the first time in probably 14 hours, she did. Very clearly, I told her not to call me again, and that she had gone way over the line, and I wanted nothing to do with her after this. In a calm, monotone voice, she makes me shudder to this day when she said, "What do I have to do to prove my love for you? Do you want me to kill myself? How about my dog? I can kill her for you." Honestly, I was shocked. I just told her no, and that if she loved me, she would move on and get help. This was the worst possible answer. Immediately, she started screaming again. I hung up. I'm shaking again, just remembering this all. She called me back consistently for the rest of the morning until I turned my phone off. The next day I went in and got my number changed, hoping that would be the end of it. A few days passed and I'm at work. My boss comes over to me saying that there's a call from my mom. I thought nothing of it until I picked up the phone and heard Jen's voice on the other end. She started talking about how she had started cutting herself and how she would keep going until she was dead if I didn't unblock her. So I hung up the phone without a word. I told my boss to not bother me with phone calls unless it was from a known listed number on my emergency contact file. With my new phone, I set up Telegram again and started going through blocking all of her other accounts, but this still wasn't the end of it. For about 6 months after the whole thing went down, every few weeks I would get a new Telegram contact on a new number begging me to unblock her so we could be together. I know it's not some big climactic end, but honestly, what could I do? All I knew of her at the time was her first name, screen name, and state. If I had reported to the police, nothing would have been done anyways. The cops here don't take kindly to queer people like myself, so I just didn't want to risk any BS with them. Oh, and to the Jen, the out-of-control lesbian from Ark Survival Evolved, I hope you've gotten help, but please let's never meet again. Hi there. I'm usually a reader, like a lifetime reader on Let's Not Meet, but I'm a first-time poster. Anyway, here's something that happened to me recently. I had gotten a notification saying that someone had added me on Snapchat. I checked how they had added me, and it said they added me by user. I added them back, and they immediately texted me just a simple "Hi" and "How are you doing?" Sweet, right? Now in my mind, I knew that this could go two ways. I would reply and have an actual nice conversation with them, or they could just ignore what I said and send me unwanted pictures. Well, I got lucky, or so I thought. They went the first way, and they were really nice until they lied. I asked them how they found my account, and his response was, "I randomly added you." I then asked how old he was. He responded with 25. I'm a female that is only 15, please keep that in mind. I tell him that I shouldn't start texting him, and he said he understood and called me love. Red flags. Hours later, he started texting me again, asking me if it was possible to get to know each other and go on a date. I said no because I'm underage. He didn't take no for an answer and comes at me with, "But I want to spoil someone. I'm the manager at this company that I've been working at for 4 years, blah blah blah." And like I said, I'm a long-time reader, so automatically I was like, hell no, I know how this shit goes. He then proceeds to tell me about himself, and to my shock, he lives in my city. I turn off my location and everything. He starts asking me, and I ignore his questions and ask him what he looks like. He tries to play the reverse Uno card on me, and I play it back, earning his username instead of his name he had before. He had blocked me. So dear Mateo, let's not meet ever again, whether it's on social media or real life. And yes, I still don't want to go on a date with you. I was on Snapchat for like 20 seconds when all of my friends have already reposted some weird messages saying a senior had threatened to shoot up the school. The message by the guy said, "Mothers will mourn, siblings will cry, fathers will remember. I'm gonna kill someone this week. God help me." Then there was this video of him shooting an AR-15. I was creeped the fuck out. I started calling my mom and dad, crying and begging them not to take me to school tomorrow. Luckily they said they heard, and me and my big sister didn't go to school. Even luckier, the 3 kids were arrested for the plot of that threat and nothing happened that day. I don't know what happened to the guy who said it, but all I know is soon he'll get the help that he needs. This happened a couple years ago, and while it's not the scariest situation, it was definitely creepy. I was on my way to work and decided to stop at the mall to pick up some things I needed. As I was walking to my destination, I heard a voice behind me say, "Hello Megan, how are you?" I turned around expecting to see someone I knew, but was surprised to see a tall man I had never seen before smiling at me. He said, "Hey Megan," and I sputtered a meek, "Hi," and kept walking. I thought he maybe said ma'am, and I had just misheard it, so I ignored it and kept walking to my destination. Once I get to the store, I notice he's still behind me and enters the store with me. My gut is telling me this is not normal, but once again, I give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm looking around through the racks of clothes when I look up to see him looking around the store as if he was looking for someone. I'm about 5'1", so I hide well in stores with racks and clothes, so I just grabbed what I wanted and walked to the front to pay for it. I look up again, and he's standing right behind me staring. The cashier and I shared an awkward glance, and I paid and walked out with this man right on my tail. So I got fed up and turned around to him and said, "What the hell do you want?" He then said, "You," and just walked away. So I walked in my car the whole time looking over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't nearby, and once I was inside the car I pulled out my phone to call my dad, and I noticed I had a Facebook notification, which was a friend request from this stranger. I called my dad, who said to check the Bluetooth airdrop to see if it's on, and it wasn't, because I never used Bluetooth. I looked out my car window to see this guy looking around the parking lot and looking into car windows. I tell my dad that, and he tells me just to go, so I did. I blocked this guy on Facebook and haven't seen or heard from this guy again. I hope I never do. As I wait to clock in for work, I remember this strange situation I had and thought I'd share. So to start off, I'm a paranoid person and probably avoid people and interaction more than normal. I really hate to be in public, non-professional areas like gas stations, but university is fine. So my first year at college, like I said, I don't like to be alone in public places like gas stations. So thankfully, my protective father and older brother would fill up my car's gas tank for me, so I didn't have to go on my own. However, one day I was low on gas and went to a relatively nice gas station 1 block away from my university. I felt fine because this gas station was all college students as well. I was having trouble with my gas pump and assumed it was a problem with my car, so I looked around and stopped what I assumed was a fellow college student dude. I never told this man my name or anything. It was a quick 1-minute interaction, just asking him to check the gas pump for me. It was a gas pump that was faulty after all, so I went to the clerk, and that's that. Anyway, fast forward 2 years. I never really had a real social media like Instagram, Snapchat, or whatever. I just have an empty Facebook with selfie PFPs, 3 to 4 friends added, and my university tagged. And my name was spelled slightly off for protection. Yes, I'm paranoid. I do use Facebook Messenger a lot to talk to friends, so I saw that I received a message request. "Hey, how are you? We met at the gas station." You won't believe it, I only managed to find you until today. Of course, I didn't respond or accept the message, and just left it so it looked like a dead account. I don't know how he managed to find me. Even people who knew me well have a lot of trouble tagging or finding me. Did he take my car's license plate? Did he look through the whole list of people who were tagged to the university to find me? Who knows, but I'm more annoyed than scared that the first time I ever went out of my comfort zone and finally did something for myself, I get creeped on. Do you really attract what you fear? So, this didn't happen to me, but a friend of a friend. She had told me that her friend had met a guy on Tinder from another city whom she had been texting with for a little while. They planned to meet up at her apartment one night. The whole time he was there, she got a really weird and creepy vibe from him. He would make morbid jokes and tease and flirt her in a super creepy way, like telling her that he loved her tits, but that they would be much bigger and therefore hotter if she was 200 pounds heavier. When it was time to go, he seemed reluctant to leave and asked if he could stay, but she refused, and he finally left. Half an hour later, however, he was back at her front door, asking her if he could spend the night at her place because he had missed his train. She reluctantly agreed to let him sleep on the couch for the night, but when she went to bed, she made sure to lock her bedroom door. At some point in the night, she heard strange sounds and him creeping through her apartment. A few moments later, he was knocking on her door, saying he needed help with something, but her gut feeling told her not to open the door, so she stayed put. When the morning came, she cautiously left her room and looked through her apartment. He was gone apparently, but she discovered her bathroom was entirely covered in foil. Always make sure to trust your gut and meet your Tinder dates in a public place if it's the first time. You can't really gauge what a person is like from just texting them. Remember the early days of the web? AOL software upgrades arrived in the mail on a CD-ROM. Family members shouted across the house to another if an incoming call on the landline interrupted the painstaking 10 minutes it took to get from the American Online sign-in screen to hear, "You got mail," reverberate throughout the whole room. Receipts of multicolored chain emails, a serial killer camping out in a young girl's shower and killing her guard dog, and truly pondered the threat against their luck for the next 7 years if they didn't abide by the message's command to forward it on to 7 friends. Better not risk it, we told ourselves as we quickly typed out 7 email addresses in the receipt field. And finding everything there was to know about a person online, something anyone could do today with a few keystrokes and a credit card, was a lot harder to do back then, but not for Corey. I was 15 years old. At the time, ambiguous and exotic usernames like Pina Colada 33 were all the rage. Naive as we early screen name pioneers were, being anonymous was smart. Social media was in its infancy. Everyone was friends with Tom on MySpace. AIM didn't exist as a standalone message service just yet, so it was MSN Messenger or bust. But if you had a true AOL account like I did, you were set up with all you needed to discover this new, hyper-connected, free-for-all world in the early 2000s World Wide Web. Your own email box, a new page to create a personal profile, access to chat rooms on just about any topic or hobby you could possibly imagine. It was exhilarating, until it was terrifying. One afternoon, I jumped into one of these chat rooms. Age, sex, location. 16, female, Boston. I watched the usual exchange between total strangers scroll across my screen for several minutes, hoping to find my opportunity to finally chime in and introduce myself. Ultimately, I got bored and left that chat without typing a word. An instant message appeared on my screen. You didn't say anything. Why not? Who is this? Being confused by the username as I didn't recognize it. I'm Corey. I'm 16. 8th grade in Lake Charles, Louisiana. What about you? 16 in 8th grade? Yikes. And yet, I was intrigued. So, you get held back twice or what? I teased. And so the conversation began. We struck up a brief online friendship that afternoon. He shared a photo. Freckled face, brown hair. Nothing I would rate above a 5 on a hot or not scale. Yet despite the friendliness, I refused to tell him where I was from, or any personal things about me beyond my first name and age. I knew a little bit about the dangers of the internet, but I wasn't dumb either. My username was a fruity drink and some numbers. Safe enough, I figured. For background, I did have one of those AOL user profiles. Its standard features included a profile picture and a questionnaire filled out with fun facts about you. My photo was one of me with several friends, no indication of which one I was whatsoever. A few days later, Corey messaged me out of the blue. "You're beautiful." What? "Brunettes with green eyes, man." Somehow, despite my photo containing 3 other friends, he accurately identified me. "I would love to see you sometime." I felt my skin prick. I politely told him something to the effect of not being possible and quickly logged off. Friday, the following week, I was sleeping over at my best friend's house. I logged into my account in the background as we thirstily browsed cute guys on Hot or Not. "Who's messaging you?" my friend asked. I knew. It was Corey. "Hey, you live in Houston. Your parents are James and Sarah Miller, and you live on 1655 South Grand." You know that feeling when you're on a roller coaster during a sharp drop and your heart jumps into your throat? That was that moment. Fortunately, we managed to find out that AOL in fact did have a block user feature that night. That was it. So long, creepy 16-year-old middle schooler with scarily good online sleuthing skills. It didn't last long. The next day, a screen name similar to Corey's messaged me. He had another account. I quickly blocked it. This happened 5 more times. I finally went dark for a while. Sure, I missed the thrill of seeing that yellow envelope appear in the virtual mailbox, but it was better than the threat of being harassed by Corey. A few weeks later, I got home from school. My little sister was a baby at the time, 14 years my junior. She had a nanny who stayed with her during the day while my parents were at work. When I walked to the door of the kitchen, the nanny handed the phone to me. "It's for you," she said with a quizzical look on her face. "Who is it?" "I really don't know. Some boy with a twang in his voice. Sounded like he was from East Texas or Louisiana." Oh God. Hello? I muttered into the phone. "Hey pretty thing, it's Corey. So my friends and I are all into that show Jackass. We're thinking of making a trip over to Houston and doing some pranks around the town next week. How hilarious would it be if I surprised you at your front door?" I choked down a nervous laugh. I mumbled an excuse about having a quiz the next day and quickly hung up. For the next few weeks, I slept with a knife under my mattress. I was absolutely terrified I would wake up with Lake Charles Stranger Boy on the balcony outside my window. How did he get my phone number? But just as soon as he invaded my sense of security, he seemingly disappeared. No instant messages, no uninvited calls at my home. The knife finally went back into its respective kitchen drawer. 2 months passed, and it felt gloriously safe till the phone rang the first week of summer break. "Hi." "Who is this?" "It's me, Corey." Let me be clear, this wasn't the same voice I heard 2 months ago. That voice was dripping in southern syrup. It was young and full of mischief. The new voice was different. It was cold. It lacked any discernible accent. It was older. I was speaking to a grown man. "I'm sorry I haven't been able to talk to you," he hurriedly blurted out. Why did he sound rushed? "I feel terrible, but the police came to my house. They took my computers away from me. I can't say why, but don't worry. I'll come to Houston soon." That was the last day I used that fruity username. I deleted that account and created a new one. I embarrassingly told my parents I made a huge mistake, despite having shared nothing that could have easily revealed my personal identity. Even if I had, the threat back then wasn't what it is now. This was nearly 20 years ago. Back then, people simply didn't have the online presence that they do today. As a teenager with no social media yet, I was virtually a ghost, but still, I was convinced I was somehow culpable for this stranger, this man, a predator who clearly had advanced knowledge of computers and the internet, singling me out and making it his mission to learn everything about me through whatever means possible. He was determined to get to me. I'm only grateful that even at 15, I knew better than to trust that freckled-faced kid from the online chat room. 2 decades later, I still wonder where Corey ended up. Hopefully behind bars. Bad vibes here. Trigger warning for assault for this story. Hey everyone. For reference, I'm a 19-year-old teen who's fairly tall in structure. This takes place a couple months ago, around October I would say. Being extremely bored at college and my other friends hooking up left and right, I decided to jump on the Tinder bandwagon. Yeah, I know all the risks and all that, but hey, I was bored and always made sure to inform my friends where I was at. When scrolling, I meet this guy. Although I'm not the prettiest person in the world, I would definitely say I was lowering my standards for this particular prick. Large glasses, kinda chubby, in a cute way, and was only a couple inches taller than me. However, he seemed nice and said he was interested in pre-med. He liked to paint, I liked to draw, and was only a couple years older than me. Why not? So I scroll right and move on. The next day he messaged me several times and I responded back. The dude seemed interested, if not a little too interested, but hey, he wanted to get coffee in a public place, so I accepted. So we get coffee. This dude is definitely a nerd, but I like that. I'm really studious myself and really like to force hard on my academics. He buys me coffee and asks if I wanted to go back to his place. Red flag right there, but this guy was not someone that screamed date rape, frat, or intimidating. We go back and we make out and it's getting a little heated. Granted, I made it clear that I wanted a relationship, not a hookup, and wasn't willing to give him sex since I was and still am a virgin. Well, guess the guy had more experience than I thought. Gave me the whole consent talk, which I thought was weird, but was cool with it. I want to add that I didn't really enjoy the whole makeout undressing part, and honestly was bored throughout the entire thing, and was faking it the whole time. The guy just didn't do it for me. So I leave and walk home. End of story. Well, he hits me up the next day and asks if I want to hang out again. I don't really want to, but the guy said it could be a study date. I try breaking it off, but he's persistent, so I end up saying sure. I ask my mom and she says go for it. Apparently the guy had a 4.0, so he must be smart. I told him I have homework and shit to do, no funny business. He said it was fine. He lied. The second time I got to his apartment, he tried forcing me into having a drink like he did the first time we met. I'm underage and he knows it. I say no, he insists. I laugh it off and get some water. Then it gets weird. He tries getting me into his bed and begs for me to kiss him. Like, persistent begging. Pathetic persistent begging. I'm trying to study and ignore him, and I finally relent and give in. He set a timer for cuddle time, which turns into making out with me, and it was unpleasant. Then he tries to get me undressed. I tell him no. He begs and brings up how I undressed for him last time. I relent again, after telling him no several times and clearly being uncomfortable. He makes me undress him, which I found repulsive, and drags me into the shower. Trigger warning ahead. We get into the shower together and he's pressing his erect penis against my butt. I start to freak out due to being sexually assaulted by an older man as a freshman. He then forced me to stick my hand into his crotch. I yelped and smacked his hand away. He apologizes, but becomes passively annoyed, and we dry off and sat on his bed. This is when it gets worse. He makes casual comments about how young he looks, and I inquire him about it. Turns out this man is 28 years old, which was 10 years older than me at the time. I thought he was 21. What the fuck? I wanted out. I'm shaking at this point. Then, becoming extremely serious, he asked me why I'm still a virgin and why I wouldn't have sex with him. I tell him I'm a Christian, and he laughs and says, "You already undressed me. I don't think you're that much of a Christian." Fuck him, I wanted out. Then the begging begins again, with him giving lewd comments about my body. I'm almost in tears at this point, when he again begs and forces me to give him a hand job. I do what he asks, and hand him tissues disgusted when he comes all over himself. This is when he gets all angry. He glared at me and tells me that he has to make a phone call. This is my chance. I run over to my phone to text my guy friends to call me and bail me out. Luckily, my guy friend makes up an excuse and I put him on speaker. I'm trembling at this point and I can't stop. Seeing his mistake, this asswad begins to apologize profusely and I grab my bag, almost leaving my computer as I sprint out of there. After hiding out at Noodles and Company for an hour, I make it back to my dorm in tears and shaking profusely while my roommate promptly ignored me. Did I report him? No. Turns out this guy's parents are filthy rich and related to someone powerful in the government in China. My parents didn't care and just thought that I had regrets. I tried to commit suicide right after and consistently feel dirty, still not over it, even though I wasn't technically raped. So Eric, fuck you. My lesson to you all, never feel safe around any new man you meet, even if they don't seem intimidating.